Yeah, she has a call. So I'll be your moderator right now. And I'll very briefly introduce Brandon Stark. He's the director of the University of California Center of Excellence on Unmanned Aircraft Systems Safety. He provides system-wide UAS expertise to all 10 of the campuses in the UC system. He's going to UC Santa Cruz tomorrow to speak on a similar topic. Brandon will be covering, we have two speakers today. We benefit from two experts on unmanned aerial systems. Both will be covering different aspects of UAVs. But Brandon will look at the logistics, the legal, the safety training, and potential uses for drones. And then we'll have Sean, who we'll introduce later. He'll cover more of the application in historic sort of settings and give some case examples. So welcome, Brandon.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here on kind of the enemy campus at the UC system. The Stanford is our crosstown rival, but I'm here to talk about unmanned aircraft systems. It's a kind of a fun, engaging new topic. I'm the director of our unmanned aircraft systems safety program in the UC system. So I get to see and oversee quite a lot. Just kind of like a one-page slide on what I do for the University of California. I do a lot of policy, I do a lot of risk management, I handle UAS operations, authorizations, and I work with the FAA on behalf of all of our UC faculty and staff. So I have a very unique view of UAS activity across everything that we do in the UC system, ranging from our student uses, our faculty, our staff, and all that other fun stuff. So what I'm here to talk about today is a little bit about how we're getting started using drones. What are some of those drone regulations, some safety guidelines, and what's upcoming on the horizon when it comes to some of the regulations that are upcoming, and how that may affect a lot of your potential activities with drones. But if you have any questions about drones, feel free to interrupt me and ask them. I answer questions all day long. I've been answering them all morning. So just a very quick one-page slider on how do you get started with drones, and very much similar to what Matt had said in the previous presentation, is really you need to be clear about why you're using a drone. You don't want to just start thinking, I'm going to use a drone, because if you don't know why you're using it or what you want out of it, you're probably going to end up going in the wrong direction. Make sure that you have a good understanding of what you're actually wanting to use a drone for. What are your data goals? And there's a lot of different types of drones. They range from a couple $100s to several $1,000s, $20,000 to $50,000. You may not be willing to invest in a $50,000 drone if you've never flown a drone before. Make sure you stick within your drone budget. And then also think about whether or not you could even operate the drone at the location you want to be flying at. There are a lot of drone regulations, and there are more upcoming over the next couple of years. So it is an active topic. But once you do decide that you're going to be using a drone, you do need to register your drone. You need to have a drone license in most cases. And you may need to look for any additional authorizations or permits that you may need to have to operate a drone. Drone insurance is another topic. Make sure you have plenty of practice. A lot of drones are autonomous. You can literally just draw out a map of where you want the drone to fly in, but I will guarantee you something will go wrong. I just had a student crash a drone into a tree the other day on an automated routine. So make sure you do get your practices in. But most importantly, if you're playing with new technology, you should always be having fun with it. I get to play with drones not as often as I would like. I'm usually behind a desk doing paperwork, but when I do get to have my fun with them. So within a university setting, I do see a lot of drones in a wide range of applications. Traditionally, they've been in the engineering departments. We've had a lot of engineering, aerospace engineers building, flying drones for decades. Berkeley has been doing that for many, many years. But it's been in the past couple of years, we've really started to see this kind of outreach into some of the other applications. Field research has been a major avenue of growth in the US industry and higher education. But our students, of course, have always been flying drones, model aircrafts. We also have our visitors to campus, a lot of film and media usage, as well as our campus and facilities when it comes to our infrastructure inspections and constructions. Every UC campus is almost always has some construction project going on, and now every single one of them is using drones to monitor their construction progress. So it's been a very wide range of activity. So I do like to show off some of those less common uses of drones that have been popping up recently. So videos weren't showing up in the PowerPoint, but I have them right here. So here's a fun one from Santa Barbara, where they're taking water samples from a drone. So you've got a little water sampler right there. This drone is a modified platform, Pixhawk controller. And actually, he's got a little buoy right here, and it drops down 15 feet, so he can get water samples at 10 meters. No, I think he's dropping it down to 15 feet. He was just hovering it at 30 feet. So this has been one of the funner projects coming out of Santa Barbara. They're carrying around 2.2 pounds of water from this custom-made platform. So we've been seeing a lot of in-situ measurement systems with drones. At UC Merced, we've been doing similar things, and then also doing putting gas sensors on drones, sniffing for gas particles. I don't know if you get them here, but I've been seeing a lot of Chevron commercials talking about drone pilots. Yeah, so the gas sniffing drones are totally a thing now too, as well as water sampling drones. And eventually, I know that researchers at Riverside are working on tree sampling drones, where they go through and collect leaves from the drones as they fly by. Now that we're seeing all sorts of new fun stuff with drones. They have to apply it manually here. It's a bit of a challenge kind of swinging a very long pendulum. That's a UC Santa Barbara there. Here's a fun one out of Riverside. So just a normal drone here, a Phantom 3 Professional, I think that was. But he's operating it out of a cherry lift. He's doing this because he's operating in a very narrow canyon in San Diego, and he couldn't maintain line of sight without being up 60 feet in the sky. He's trying to show off his mission planner screen. You obviously can't see. You can see you got a road right here, palm trees that are 60 feet tall. He's trying to maintain line of sight. He's flying up and down this area. It's a narrow area right here. He's looking and counting these diseased palm trees and monitoring the spread of weevils that are infecting these palm trees in San Diego County. This is, you can see his paws right there. You can really see, right, all of those dying palm trees. And this is the area that he's flying up and down on. So whereas the group of Santa Barbara was working on a custom-built drone, this researcher just bought a Phantom 3 standard, Phantom 3 Pro, which is around $1,200, and doing this one. And all he's doing is just looking for these diseased palm trees.
So is he recording what we're seeing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is straight off the.
And then go back and count them later.
Yeah. Actually, what he does is he maps them out using a program called Drone Deploy to create a 3D map, kind of like how some of the 3D photogrammetry methods. It's a little bit harder to work when you're dealing with palm trees because they're so oddly shaped. So he doesn't really care about the 3D-ness, just the mappingness. And in San Diego, they're in such a fun location right next to the 5 freeway, right? You can see they're flying just a couple hundred feet from the 5 freeway right there. That was the site of a new construction area, and they're looking for water leaks in the ravine for drainage. And he's also using them to look at the tops of dorms for damage or signs of intrusions of students going up on top of those buildings where they're not supposed to be smoking. So that shot didn't show it, but he flies in nice and low and looks for cigarettes. And he does that. He saves the school thousands of dollars because it's not safe for people to just be walking on the roofs because the ledges are too low, and so they would need to put on OSHA rigging to be operating at that high elevation or high building. So by sending up a $500 drone, he saves lots of man hours and lots of money. Well, so there's the leaves and things like that. He's just looking to see whether or not he needs to actually send up more people up there for to pay the expenses, whether or not it's worth it. And so what he's really concerned about is students see how they have these balconies right here, jumping the balcony right here, taking a step off right here, and then climbing over the top. So that's what he uses drones over. Dorms, students are actually living in the dorms during this time because he flew this during the semester actually. So I get all sorts of crazy stuff. There's doing window washing at UC Davis Medical Center. What are some of the other fun ones? Gas sniffing. Berkeley is looking to do a drone racing competition in Cal Memorial Stadium in the fall. So all sorts of really interesting things are happening with drones. And I'm mostly talking about optical sensors here, but we do have a lot of thermal sensors, shortwave infrared sensors, which is really effective at water measurements, multispectral, hyperspectral. We have a couple of LiDAR systems that we fly on drones as well, down to the 1 millimeter level accuracy. When it works, as I was saying, you got to have the vehicle has to be in motion for that LiDAR system to actually be working, and quadrotors aren't the greatest at maintaining the right velocity. So some of the other things that we've done with drones is a lot of historical monitoring actually. So here's up in Bodie State Park. So we were doing some monitoring up there, doing some 3D reconstructions with drones. Here's a collapsed building right next to my campus, photogrammetry, or photos of school events at UC Davis. UC Santa Barbara is also doing, they're doing X-ray, kind of like a fake X-ray vision with drones using Wi-Fi. What they do is they take 2 drones and they fly them around a building, and they measure the Wi-Fi signal passing through the building to determine the strength of signal through it, and it comes up with kind of like an X-ray vision of a building, and it works for 3 to 4 layers of brick. Won't give you a perfect X-ray vision, but it's enough to see whether or not there's an object or a person behind a brick building or within a brick building. So there's a pair of antennas that they attach on those quadrotors, octorotors actually. So it's a very diverse range of activity. It's not just about flying and taking pictures. But with a lot of this drone activity that's been happening, we're also starting to see a lot of new drone service providers. So now, if you don't want to be a drone operator, you can go hire a drone startup to offer a specific service. They have a lot of drone photography for real estate applications, aerial cinematography, mapping, surveying. Surveying if they actually have the right license, which many of them don't, crop or environmental monitoring as well. In California, you actually need to have a surveyor's license to be able to qualify that you're actually doing surveying. It's a very common mistake for people trying to offer drone surveying services. But if you don't know who to hire, there's also now drone service connectors. So people who will connect you to drone pilots. Companies such as Drone Connector or Drone Base or Measure are ways to connect you as an organization with a drone service provider or a drone pilot. Some of these are qualified in some sense of the manner, but keep in mind that you as an organization are held legally liable if you hire someone without the correct licenses or authorizations. So you should make sure that you vet whether or not they actually have the right license and have the correct airspace authorization to be flying in the location that you want them to be. Because whoever hires them is still held liable for that as well. Now, drone regulations are getting interesting. It used to be pretty easy, which was just don't, because it was illegal. But now they're creating it more complex by adding more and more drone regulations. Most unmanned aircraft, they're separated by purpose. You're either a model aircraft operator or you're not recreational. So if you're a model aircraft, you fall under a particular model aircraft regulation. We'll talk a little bit about that one. But otherwise, if you're not a model aircraft, you either fall under a Part 107, which is a new civilian UAS operations. You can fall under a public agency set of regulations, or the older Section 333 exemption process. So there's 3 sets of different regulations under non-recreational. There's actually 4. There's actually 3 other ones, but those are very, very rarely used. Those are kind of the 3 bigger ones. So are you actually exempt from regulations? You are exempt from regulations if you're following under the regulations for model aircraft. If you're not a model aircraft operator, you fall under non-recreational. Model aircraft regulations are actually specifically very narrowly defined. It's not necessarily that you're kind of a backyard operator. It has to follow the definition of a model aircraft and within a set of 5 different regulations or 5 regulations related to model aircraft operation. So here's just these right here. You have to be flying for fun only. You have to fly within visual line of sight. You have to follow a set of safety guidelines from a community-based organization. You have to notify every airport and helipad within 5 miles. You can't receive any money or compensation. And even if you're not getting paid, you still can't be benefiting a business, regardless of compensation. So you can't be doing your friend a favor. If you're doing your friend a favor, it's still in furtherance of some business or official duty. So even if you're not getting paid. So this is very narrowly defined, and we do get a number of people within the UC system who come to me saying, I've been hired by the UC system to do some drone operations, but because for some reason I fall under model aircraft regulations, I'm an exempt. It's pretty disappointingly that the compliance rate for third-party operators in the UC system is around 50%. 50% of the people who say that they've been hired by the UC system to fly drones do not actually have the correct legal authorizations to do so. So it is very important that you do validate whether or not, if you do hire someone to do drone operations, that you do check to see whether or not they actually do. Now, drone regulations are complicated, and there's a fairly good chance that they just didn't know, but sometimes they did know, they just didn't want to get the drone license. There is also a narrow exemption for educational purposes within schools. So as long as it's within a coursework, a classroom, or a senior project, it counts as model aircraft. But as soon as you call it a research project, it no longer falls under the educational exemption. So if you have a class in your teaching class, you can give them all homework assignments with drones. They don't need a license. But if you give them a research project, then the student would need a license. So this is when you don't need a license, model aircraft, you don't need a license, you don't need to register your drone, you're just really going out there and having fun. Otherwise, you fall under everything else category of UAS regulations. The most common one these days with the new drone regulations is 14 CFR 107 or Part 107, which covers everything. Commercial activities with drones, research activity with drones. You can even do recreational activities under 107 license, as well as public agency operations with a 107 license. 107 license is good for everything with drones that is not recreational. And it's only applicable for aircraft under 55 pounds. So a small drone is officially defined as a drone that weighs less than 55 pounds. If you've ever seen a 55-pound drone, your first thought is that it's not small. A 55-pound drone is not a small drone. However, it is legally classified as a small drone, which makes you wonder what a not small drone looks like. Yes, they are quite large. We have a couple of 260-pound drones in the UC system. We're talking, they're basically just half-size helicopters, right? Or planes with a 20, 25-foot wingspan. So a 55-pound drone is still quite large. And all you need to operate under a 107 license or a 107 regulations is you need a drone license. So they now, with 107, they created a new drone license, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In some cases, you may fall under a public agency operation. This is only good for public agencies with public aircraft for public purposes. Public universities are considered okay. They can fall under public agency operations, and public purposes are defined as law enforcement, search and rescue, biological and natural resource research, and aerospace research. In some narrow cases, you could have cultural preservation listed as a potential public purpose if it fulfills your public agency's public purpose. So it has to be in that aspect. It has to fulfill a public purpose as you as a public agency. Now, there's specific differences in the ways that these two regulations operate. 107 is specifically for unmanned aircraft systems under 55 pounds. Public agency operations actually fall under the regulations for all civil aircraft. So this would be a 14 CFR 91 regulations. It could be aircrafts of any size. So you can fly the 150-pound drones under a public agency operations. And there are some extra procedures that you go through that one. If, as a public agency operation, you may also elect to not require a license. There are some other caveats to how you do a public agency operation. But for most people, the easiest way to get started is with a 107 drone license. And you need to get this drone license, and you need to register your drone with the correct registration. You may need an airspace authorization. This is deals with controlled airspace. But getting the drone license is not as difficult as you would think. You do not need to know how to fly a drone to get a drone license. The drone license is a knowledge-based exam process. It's like the written portion of your driver's license exam. So if you remember how easy that was, that's the base level hurdle that you need to pass to get your drone license. You need to know the rules of the road, but you do not need to demonstrate that you can follow the rules of the road. So the other caveat to this, right, is if someone says that they're FAA licensed, what it means is they know the laws, or they passed an exam. It does not mean that they're actually an experienced operator. So when you hire someone, it's important that you don't just look to see whether or not they have the license, but do they have the documentation to show that they are an expert, can actually fly the drone, can actually work the systems and deliver what they promise.
What documentation do you ask for?
Flight logs. Yeah, so flight log, the flight record, past portfolios. Any good UAS operator would have a big stack of flight logs, or either electronically or by paper. Past portfolios are another good ones to bring. Proof of insurance as well.
And that's by operator, not by drone owner?
That will be by operator, not by owner. So there is a difference. It's an interesting legal challenge between the owner of the aircraft and the operator of the aircraft. as well as the person manipulating the controls of the aircraft, because all three could be different people.
Is drone insurance expensive, and who offers it? Are they the mainstream insurance providers, or are they their own companies and that's all they provide?
Some of the mainstream people have started to offer drone insurance. They range between, I think the last time I saw a quote, about $1,000 a year for a couple of models of drones. But there's also other services that provide you drone insurance. Verifly is another one where you can purchase drone insurance on the spot. Basically, you buy drone insurance for a single flight, and you would buy that right before you take off. And I think that one can be fairly cheap at maybe $10, $20 a flight. And you can set some limits, ask for, within the UC system, we ask for a $5 million minimum aviation liability insurance policy. I think that's, drones can cause a lot of damage. The biggest payout or biggest damages we've had in the UC system was about $150,000 of damage from one drone crash. Not because the drone did a lot of damage, it just damaged the wrong thing. It damaged a fire sprinkler.
Oh.
And it was the top floor of an apartment complex. So we really wish that guy had insurance. And because of that, now everyone is required to have insurance when they operate a drone. So he was flying inside too, yeah, which is also a bad idea. I mean, it can be made safe. Just make sure that you do so in a safe manner.
Sorry,
Mhm.
with the flight, the $10 to $20 per flight, can you define what a flight is? Like, is that up, down? Like,
Yeah.
if I went up and I changed my mind, or is it like within a certain period of time? Can I go up, down, and
In terms of Verifly, that one's by the hour, I believe it is. I haven't used Verifly in a while. At one point it used to be up, down, but I think they've changed it to a specific number of up, downs within a 1 hour time period.
And you're here because we're historic-oriented folks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's curious that we have a drone, but now I guess if I'm thinking about it, I guess people are using drones to look at older homes and things like that. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason why you're talking.
Absolutely. So
we're looking at it right now. Yeah. For one of our buddies, very helpful.
And I've done it, and he thinks it was illegal, but it wasn't.
You did it?
No, I didn't. Somebody hired a professional drone operator, but to look at like a multi-story, a skyrise historic
mm-hmm.
building, that, like you were showing the roofs, or that you have access
Yeah.
to something that's otherwise quite expensive to access.
Mm-hmm. So areas that are hard to get to, right?
That example that you show in the 4 photos, that one on the top left, that's Bodie, right?
Yep, that's Bodie.
And that was a state parks hired group, I think, based also out of UC Merced, or Merced was somehow involved.
Oh, yeah, it was probably Dr. Lakari.
Right.
And I signed his paperwork.
Yeah. So they documented some structures on there and got very high level of detail information on some of those structures that are facing collapse, because as you know, with Bodie, the intent is to keep the buildings as is without any sort of intervention, but be sure that when the public visits that they're structurally sound and that there's no accidents.
Mm-hmm.
So
Arrested decay.
arrested decay.
Yeah. And most of their flights, so they did a lot of their flights before and after the park closed, make sure there was no one in that area. And then during the day, they went to the areas that were closed off when they did their flights. And part of the idea of going to the closed off areas is, well, now we can generate the 3D models of the closed off areas and provide that information to the general public so that we can make that information more accessible to everybody. So just some of the general regulations with the drone license. And again, under 55 pounds, but for most drones, that's not a big challenge. Stay under 400 feet. There are some exemptions to that. No flying over people. which is can be very difficult in an urban setting. No flying beyond visual line of sight, and visual line of sight is a little bit more strictly defined than you might think it would be. And no flying at night unless you fill out more paperwork, which you can do. Flying at night is actually a fairly easy exemption to get. And this is what it looks like in the Merced area at around 400 feet. And this is about 2,000 undergraduate students spelling out UCM.
What's AGO?
Above ground level, so from the ground up. A lot of aviation is done in mean sea level, but for the purposes of drones, they typically describe everything in feet above the ground. So just kind of back to that differences between what recreation and non-recreation. If it's for fun, if it's classwork, if it's a club activity, it's recreation. Otherwise, you need a license. If it's plausible that someone would pay for a UAS operator to do it, then it is not recreational. I guess I got cut off there.
That doesn't make sense.
Hmm?
You have photography on the left side, but it would be plausible that someone would pay.
Depends on who is doing the photography, right? If you're doing photography for yourself for your own enjoyment, it's for fun. You wouldn't pay someone else to take photographies of the park that you're at, right? But if you're paying someone to take a park for a portfolio, then you can perceivably pay someone to do that, right? So there's a very fuzzy line in between there. It's not a great line. The way that the FAA has always defined things is just now with drones, the difference between recreation and non-recreation is just getting even blurrier. Now,
Sorry,
Mhm.
before you move on, you put up on the screen part 107, section 107, and this 14C.
CFR
and
107, yeah.
Are they all the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 107, Title 14, Part 107. Yeah, it does refer all to the same thing. Sorry, I get so caught up in my own nomenclature that I forget that I'm always talking to a new audience, right? I speak drone, which is really its own language. And then I have to try to, then I have.
Your role at the Cal is
I am the drone subject matter expert that liaises between all the UAS operators, administration, and the FAA.
So that's your main role?
Yes, that's my only role.
Well, I saw
Yeah.
saying quite a couple of drones here and there, but it sounds like it's big business.
There's about 400 drones in the UC system.
Oh,
We operate about 60 to 80 hours worth of flight time a month. The average flight time that we record is around 7 to 8 minutes.
well, I said, you're part of that whole, they check in with you and you know what
Mhm.
you're doing.
Because I got to check to see whether or not they actually have the right licenses or operating in the right locations. Now, the researchers themselves.
We all know that the freshman, sophomore college kids are really good at.
Oh, I know, they're the greatest, right? They're nowhere near as bad as faculty.
Oh, yeah.
So now the researchers themselves typically are pretty easy to monitor. Once they pick a location, they tend to fly at the same location over and over again. Research field, ag site, things like that. The more challenging parts are when we have third-party vendors, facility management, film and media departments, and other videographers and cinematographers coming to our campuses. So I've got quite a wide range of UAS activity.
How long have you had this position?
Feels like forever, but I think it's only been like a year and a half.
Which leads to another question. When did like 107 come into effect?
August 2016. Yeah, so not even a year, right? So the new drone regulations started in August 2016. Before that was, most people were operating under a Section 333 exemption, which required a manned aviation license. And before Section 333 exemptions, the only way that you can operate legally was through a public agency operation, which you also either needed a manned aviation license, or actually within the UC system, you actually only needed to do a ground school course or ground school test. And I've been operating under public agency operations since 2008. Yeah, so I've been at this for a while. I've destroyed my own fair share of drones as well.
Hopefully owned by someone else.
Oh yeah, I've only destroyed university property. The FAA has a lot of regulatory jurisdiction, but it applies to everywhere reachable in the sky. So it applies to places in between buildings. You cannot get away with following FAA regulations even if you're just right outside in this quad. So flying directly above that table right there, you're technically within the national airspace system. So you need to have a license to fly commercially over that table.
Since 2016.
Since 2003.
Okay.
That's when the FAA came up with the requirement that unmanned aircraft systems were aircraft. It includes within between buildings, below trees, even under 5 feet. The FAA does not have jurisdiction if you're inside a building. So you can fly inside a building, you can fly inside structures and things like that. You can fly within a cage. So if you just had an outdoor netted, like baseball cage, a batting cage, you can fly within that batting cage without following FAA regulations. So enclosed nets, cages, things like anything that's not allowing the aircraft to reach the sky is considered not navigatable airspace. So if you really wanted to do drone activity but you didn't have a license, just put a net over it. This one came up recently. The FAA was told that it cannot create new regulations for model aircraft. However, it does not mean that model aircraft cannot be regulated, and including other agencies can create regulations regarding model aircraft. Congress can make new laws, and I'll talk about some of the proposed ones. The state regulations on drones. Local cities, counties have drone regulations. UC system has drone policies as well. Stanford has a drone policy as well. So even though the FAA cannot create model aircraft regulations, everyone else still can.
It sounds like CEQA, it's a preservation joke, sorry.
Okay. So within the state of California, actually it's in another slide there. So the FAA has jurisdiction of the air, but state and local powers still have jurisdiction of the ground. Meaning, once you're in the sky, the regulations of the state and local powers cannot touch it, but you, with your feet on the ground, are still subject to regulations. So the National Park System says you may not take off or land a drone within the National Park System, which means you can still fly over a national park as long as you didn't take off or land within it.
And you still have to be in line of sight, right?
Well, I mean, if you're really going to that length, then you're probably not following all the regulations. But yes, you would still have to remain within visual line of sight.
And on the rim of the Grand Canyon?
Exactly, right? You stand on the property border, 2 feet on one side, launch the drone, fly over. That's technically perfectly legal. Right.
The Klondike Gold Rush Museum, which is one small corner building, and it's a national park.
Now, the operator with the feet on the ground may still also be subject to regulations. So within the state of Minnesota, you are required to, any drone operator, if you're standing in Minnesota, within Minnesota, you're supposed to have aviation insurance. There is no real good complete database on drone regulations. The closest one that I found on drone regulations at the state level is Jonathan Rupperich's web blog. He keeps a 200-page long blog of drone regulations in various states. He's only looking for ones that say drone, but in many states also regulations that apply to aircraft also apply to unmanned aircraft as well. So there may be some additional ones that he's missing. The only state that I have heard of that doesn't have a lot of drone regulations is Alabama. So Florida just passed a new law that says cities cannot enforce drone ordinances, and law enforcement can't use drones. In California, paparazzi laws apply to drones. So if you use a drone to invade someone's privacy, you're actually fined at 3 times the rate. And actually, you don't actually need to be recording to be considered an invasion of privacy. Just the act of viewing it through a transmission is considered invasion of privacy. And also in California, emergency responders are not liable if they damage a drone during the course of an emergency situation.
When did the paparazzi come into law?
2014, that one's actually pretty old. That one came about when Section 333 exemptions were starting. And then, yeah, there in Minnesota, insurance is mandatory if you're standing in Minnesota. So every state has their own drone laws, and then also every city has drone laws too. So it's something to pay attention. San Francisco requires a permit to do filming, just in general. The filming permit in San Francisco, that one's always been around for many, many years. That they've applied it to drones, I think was fairly recent though.
I think the biggest issue there actually is the paparazzi, because I think the biggest concern is if you're flying in an urban area like that, everybody's looking out their office window.
Mm-hmm.
So they're thinking espionage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're trying to do a survey, they're thinking espionage.
Absolutely, right. So it's not, most people are not necessarily going out of their way to invade someone's privacy, but the perception that someone is invading your privacy is the biggest challenge. It's a challenge between perceived risks and actual risks. I actually have a slide on that one. So some common violations when it comes to drone regulations. Visual line of sight is actually very narrowly defined. You need to not only see the aircraft, but you need to know the aircraft's location, attitude, altitude, and direction, and you need to be able to scan the airspace for flight, for other air traffic. So if I was standing at this particular viewpoint of flying a drone right here, I'd actually be unsafe because I would not be able to see any aircraft that might be coming from either side. So make sure that you do, and this is a particularly challenging case for urban environments where you may not be able to see the airspace. So the correct solution here would to not go above that tower, because then that way I could be assured that I'd have no intruding air traffic from a direction I couldn't see in. Another challenge, if you can't see the ground below the aircraft, it's unsafe. So here's my stick person. Flying above me is pretty safe. Flying over a visual obstruction like a building, well, you can kind of see it. If you know that no one's going to be on top of the roof of the building, that's going to be pretty safe. But if you're flying on the other side of the building, you don't know whether or not you're flying over anybody unless you had some visual spotters there or you had cleared the area to begin with. So if you're operating in an urban environment, stay within an enclosed area or make sure that you have controls over every area that you're flying over.
The technique they were using is from the rooftop.
Mm-hmm.
And walking around the perimeter with it, so you're always in sight and sidewalk protection.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And with that, another violation is flying over people. Under no regulations are you allowed to fly over people. It's very commonly violated. Just look up YouTube videos of drone flying over people. It's everywhere. You can only fly over people who are directly participating in the operation or within a covered structure or a stationary vehicle a moving vehicle is still considered a hazard. Because people who are driving are prone to making mistakes, which causes worse mistakes.
Prone to being disturbed when something falls on them.
Absolutely, and they're going to cause a bigger accident, right? So that's why you're not allowed to fly over moving cars. Parked cars are okay, moving cars are not. Providing helmets, hard hats, and telling people that you're flying over them does not absolve your operator's responsibility to comply with not flying over people. I get this one a lot too. They say, well, everyone has hard hats and I'm telling everybody that we're flying over this area, therefore it's okay to be flying over people. It's not. And the FAA has clearly stated that it is not. You are not allowed to be flying over people even if they're wearing hard hats. Now, you could make a safety case in which you could find an opportunity to fly over people wearing hard hats, but it is not true for all cases. You would need to ask the FAA specifically for authorization to do so. You could probably ask the FAA successfully to fly over people wearing hard hats if you were flying a drone that was this size and made of foam. Because a hard hat it'd be nothing, right? A drone this size made of foam would do nothing to a hard hat. However, because drone regulations are for any drone between 0 and 55 pounds, a 55-pound drone, a hard hat is no match for a 55-pound drone. So that's why they say that hard hats do not work in all cases.
What is the requirement to identify individuals who might be on the site, aside from indicating to them that a drone will be flying over, that they are a participating member of the survey?
So how do you turn everybody in the area into a participating member?
You were in the apartments that you were flying.
So they would have to be briefed and be acting as a spotter. So they'd have to actively be watching the aircraft. Now, if they're within the building, they're fine, right? So tell everyone to stay inside, or their job and responsibility upon leaving the building is to be looking for and watching the aircraft at all times. So it's not written into law, but it might be a good practice liability-wise, right? So they would have to be an active participant in some aspect of the drone operation safety, a visual spotter, which would require them to monitor the aircraft as it was flying, would be sufficient for being a participant. Now, if you're flying in controlled airspace, and locations that are right next to most airports, you do need to have a COA, or certificate of authorization or waiver. And you can get it through two ways, either an airspace authorization or an airspace waiver. They're actually two legally distinct processes. And basically, you fill out a form to the FAA saying, I want to fly at this location. And this location is controlled by John Wayne Airport or San Jose Airport. The FAA will then get back to you within 90 or so days and saying whether or not they'll let you do that. Unfortunately, right now it's a 90-day process. They're hoping to change that within the next year and a half to be a more instantaneous process. So we'll see how well that pans out. There's actually some chatter this morning that the FAA hopes to roll out automated airspace access for 50 airports in the fall. And I think San Jose Airport was one of them. However, if you want an airspace authorization, approval from the air traffic controller or the airport manager is not sufficient. You actually need to have this COA, this form 7711. So you actually need to get a paper document that says you have airspace authorization. A verbal confirmation from an airport manager is not sufficient.
So does the FAA notify the air traffic controller that a drone will be flying, or is it a concern of them that that there would be one in their airspace?
Yes and no. Many of the airports made maps that said, tell us if a drone is flying in this area, but don't tell us if it's flying in that area. So in some cases, the airport controller may not know. This was taken at UC Santa Barbara. If anyone's been to the Santa Barbara campus, the runway is right behind that building. Yeah. So when I fly there, Colleen, who's very nice, takes my phone call every time. I have to call her up every time I go flying. I'm at Santa Barbara and tell her, hey, I'm going to be flying here from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But that's because the runway is right there. But at UC Irvine, John Wayne International Airport is about 2.5 miles from the campus. They don't want us to call them. So they don't care.
You have COAs that cover those
Mhm.
areas?
Yeah, so the UC system has 37 airspace authorizations at all of our campuses, at all of our NRS sites, research sites that may be impacted by airspace authorizations.
So how long do they last? How long does it go last?
They were supposed to be 6 months. Right now, any airspace authorization that you get is going to be good till June 30th, 2018, which is more than 6 months. Yeah, the FAA is really just kind of making this up as they go. So my answer is going to be completely different if I give this talk next month. The initial intention was that an airspace authorization, this process would grant you approval for 6 months at a time. The waiver process would grant you for 2 years at a time. But they keep on changing their own internal policies, so it keeps on changing. And it's going to change again. There's also one more area of airspace, temporary flight restrictions. Some of them are not quite so temporary, but no drone, or actually in most cases, no aircraft can operate within a TFR. Falls under the 91 regulations, which applies to all aircraft. An example with this, you're not allowed to fly within 3 nautical miles of Disneyland, under 3,000 feet. So you can fly over Disneyland at 4,000 feet, but not at 3,000 feet. So the White House has a big 30 nautical mile radius, Disneyland, Disney World, has a couple of permanent TFRs. There are also ones at some baseball games and football games. So any Division I football game stadium that seats more than 30,000 people, anytime that there is a game going on, you're not allowed to fly within 3 nautical miles.
So last year at Levi Stadium during one of the football games, they had a drone flying around in the stadium.
Yeah.
This is bad.
That was illegal. But, yeah.
So there's no circumstance in which they can do that.
Correct.
And the Rose Bowl had a drone flying this year on January 7th.
Mhm.
It was on ABC.
Mhm.
Where, it comes up on the outside and goes over the rim and flies around inside. That was illegal too.
There are some exemptions to that one. The Rose Bowl may have gotten an exemption. Like Disneyland can fly Disneyland drones over Disneyland. So I'd assume that the Rose Bowl would be able to fly the Rose Bowl drones. And they'd be able to do so safely because they can assume that no one else is going to be in the area.
So Levi Stadium can own drones and fly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
So, does this include all the amusement parks?
Disneyland, Disney World specifically right now?
It should be fair to all.
No. Disneyland, Disney World are special because they launch fireworks.
Oh.
That's one of the reasons why they do that. And Cal and UCLA just because they have giant stadiums and there's lots of people. Okay, so enough about those tedious drone laws. Let's talk safety. How am I doing on time?
Maybe 5-10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can speed through it.
Oh, I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
He's a drone.
flying drones can be made once you figure out the regulations, which I talked a lot about kind of the the unique cases. In most cases, though, it's fairly simple to get up and started. If you're looking to fly out in a remote area, 107 license is typically all you need, and there's not a lot for you to worry about. It's when you're flying in urban areas that you really need to worry about. So if you're flying in areas where there's lots of people, make sure that you set up good perimeters and you have visual observers and supporting ground crew to help maintain situational awareness for pedestrian traffic. And make sure that the pilot's focus is on the mission and not answering questions, or as one faculty tried to do, trying to teach while flying a drone. Bad idea. Right into a floodlight. Destroyed his $3,000 Inspire 1 because he was trying to teach a student while piloting and wasn't paying attention. When you're flying, make sure that you put in good safety buffers. A good rule of thumb that we use in the UC system is about 1/4 of your flight altitude. So if you're flying at 400 feet, buffer about 100 feet. If you're flying at 100 feet, buffer about 25 feet. And, you know, you can take leeways either direction. If you're flying a really small aircraft or if you're flying a bigger aircraft, you can adjust that as you go. But just a good rule of thumb, about 1/4 of your flight altitude. If you wanted to calculate the ballistic distance of a out of control drone, it typically falls within 1/4 of your flight altitude. I've done the math. If you're flying next to roads, it's always a good idea to make sure that you put ground crew with access to the road in case you do lose a drone inside the road, that someone can go retrieve it. Make sure that you try to avoid causing distractions and secondary accidents as you go. That's like the construction site at Riverside that I just reviewed a couple weeks ago. They're flying a drone over this site. They wanted to go over here, but they couldn't unless they either closed off this road or they put visual observers on the other side of the fence. They wouldn't be able to see on the other side of the fence. Privacy and operations in public. This is a challenge. It's not always about you're actually violating someone's invasion or someone's privacy. It's about the perception that you may be violating or invading someone's privacy. So, and because people vary drastically on their opinions of drones, some people like them, some people hate them, you do want to be a little bit extra cautious. Always act professionally. Find ways that you can minimize even the perception of an invasion of privacy. So when we did our dorm inspections, we didn't fly the drone anywhere near the windows. We actually launched from across the other side of the parking lot, flew up, flew over the buildings, and then we flew onto the buildings. So the drone was never really in view of any of the windows. We flew up, over, and then down. So that helps us avoid even the perception of an invasion of privacy. Okay. So I'll just kind of skip through some of these laws. Laws are always going to be keep on changing. There's a couple of new ones that keep on popping up. Last year, they extended the FAA funding bill, which then added a couple new regulations. One of the ones that came out of it was that the FAA was instructed to develop new regulations on the remote identification of drones. This goal, which is they're supposed to come out with recommendations by the end of October, they want to be able to identify, categorize, to track and identify any drone in the sky. So kind of like having a pointer that says whose drone is that. They have no clue. That's why they established they created a committee to deal with that.
On your last slide, I think the typo.
Probably.
Establish a $20,000 fine.
Yes.
Probably fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could be interpreted as a $20,000 finder's fee for inappropriate use.
Yeah. Nope. Just $20,000 fine for interfering with wildlife or wildfire suppression. So it's a federal crime to interfere with wildfire suppression. And it happens all the time. I think the numbers is like 36 this summer. There's some other ones that are coming out or been proposed. Remember, the FAA needs to have a new authorization bill by September, because that's when their funding runs out. And Congress is supposed to write a new bill that gives them funding Yeah, that'll be interesting to see what pops out of that one. Right now, remember, a lot of Congress is writing to do air traffic privatization. So they want air traffic control system to be separate from the FAA and to be spun off as its own private entity, which has some implications on drones, airspace in general, and all this other fun stuff. So it's going to get more complicated. There's some other proposed bills: Drone Federalism Act, Drone Privacy, Drone Innovation, Safe Drone Act. Drone regulations is kind of a new topic to be battling over in Congress, a new topic for all the cities and states to be fighting over. It's a new battlefield for control. Everyone is trying to fight for control over the airspace, or what they perceived as their control. And so we're going to see this battled out at all levels: the federal, the state, the local. Even our colleges are getting involved, which is why they have me. So I fight for the UC system airspace, and everyone else is fighting for their cut of the airspace as well. So it's going to get more complicated. In one proposal that I saw, they were looking at different regulations being controlled at different altitudes by different entities. So a city may control up to 200 feet AGL, the state may control up to 400 feet AGL, and the FAA may control everything above that. So it's going to get slightly more complicated. Right. I borrowed this from my colleague at San Diego. It's a Gary Larson comic that he adjusted, connecting the dots, and you just drew an FAA. Right. He's all confused, and this is really what it is. The FAA is trying to connect the dots of how we manage airspace with the wide, diverse range of UAS activities, platforms, uses, agencies, people who want control over airspace, but in reality, they may not even be able to be connected. So hopefully this didn't muddle this up too much. Getting into drones is a lot easier now than it was in the past. There are still some hoops to jump through, and unfortunately those hoops are moving and they're changing, and they may introduce more hoops next week, next month, next year. We'll find out. But there's still a lot of good work that can be done. If you want to get into the drone world, I would recommend that you start small. Drone license is $150. It's a knowledge-based exam. The FAA says that 90% of the people pass on the first try, and with about 20 hours of self-study material. It's not a particularly big hurdle to jump over now. You can get a pretty decent beginner drone for $400 to $500. The DJI Phantom 3 standard is $500. It won't take 4K video, but it'll take 2.7K video, which is generally pretty sufficient, and it'll get you a good idea what it is to fly a drone, and to see whether or not you want to be investing more into drones, or if you want to be hiring a drone operator to handle this for you. Within the UC system, many of our researchers are opting to stop hiring outsiders and just start flying them on their own. I don't know if that's a larger trend, but with the drone licenses dropping in prices, many of our researchers are no longer hiring outside operators to fly drones. They're now just doing it themselves. So I have lots of other materials on safety management, pilot exams, all this other fun stuff. Here's some of my contact information, and I'll make sure that my slide set is available to the group as well.
So your drones fly over before you enter training camps, and what you're going to do this year?
I'm not allowed to let people do illegal activity, right?
Thank you so much. Who's the youth outside of UC? So, because I would think for a lot of historic buildings surveys, many people will be going to hired services, but the hired services have a vested interest in getting a job.
Mm-hmm.
So then the checks and balances on who would know the current regulations are what would you go? Where do you start in order to go and find out information on what the current regulations are for your area?
You have to do a lot of that legwork yourself right now. Right? There's no oversight body other than the FAA, and the FAA only cares about national airspace. So if you want to find out the state and local laws, you may have to do that on your own. And there's not a lot of people like me.
Are there lawyers like people already?
Oh, I'm sure there's drone lawyers. Jonathan Ruprick, there's a link to his webpage, is a high-priced drone lawyer. He's actually pretty good. I've checked his work. He knows his stuff. He gets a lot of educational things wrong, but that's because he's not in education. jruppricklaw.com. He's a good resource. He's got a pretty good law blog. There's a couple of others. Some of the drone, let's go back here. Drone service connectors qualify their operators and services. So Measure does like on-site training checks for whoever they bring into their system. And I believe DroneBase does as well. So someone from Measure would actually go out to someone they're about to hire to be part of their service and run them through a various number of tests to see whether or not they're actually not just have the license, but know how to fly well.
Do the insurers keep up with current
Yes,
regs?
they do.
So that would be another reason.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and they will not give you insurance if they know that you are breaking the law.
So they'll know.
Yeah.
The 3.4 million responses to drone lawyers on Google.
Oh yeah. But
It's everything you can imagine.
absolutely, with of course varying levels of actual knowledge and skills, right? So if you think the Wild West for laser scanners, this is really the Wild West for drones. Drone laws and making things up as you go.
I mean, it seems like you talked a lot about public property, parks. A lot of us work in cities and urban areas. What's the general perception over private property? Do it if you want to, but follow the regulations.
Oh,
Good idea?
well, I mean, do you want to be friends with the people you're flying over?
Yeah, theoretically.
Okay. So a general perception of privacy, invasion of privacy of drones operating over their property, generally people are not okay with it. People tend to not like drones flying overhead. Actually, there was a news article, NASA did research. Drones are very annoying, even if they're the same volume. Yeah, they're noisy. They're more disruptive than cars at the same decibel level. So people notice hearing a drone more than they would notice hearing a car driving by. So people are still very sensitive to drones flying over their area. I generally would not recommend flying over private property without their explicit consent. Now, technically, in many cases, it's not illegal. You could be cited as trespass if they asked you not to do it and you were somehow disrupting their activities throughout the day. But they'd have to show that somehow you were disrupting their activities or maybe a business of some sort that was operating.
And if they came outside, you're flying over them?
Yeah, they could easily disrupt you by just walking underneath your drone, in which case you'd be forced to, get out of their way, and they could just be playing tag with you, right? That's an easy way to disrupt drone activities, to walk underneath you. You should, of course, you need to make sure that you do avoid flying over people. So the assumption that an area is clear is not sufficient. You actually have to know that you're not flying over people. So if you were flying over a backyard or a big area with lots of backyards, you would have to know that in each backyard that you were currently in, you were not flying over anybody. Which of course introduces additional privacy concerns, because the only way that you would know that would be to aim a camera down there. So generally try to avoid flying over people's backyards and things like that, unless you get their explicit permission. People are more trusting of actual commercial pursuits of drone use than they are of just a hobbyist flying recklessly or flying around in the backyard. So, and I know that we've done this in Baltimore actually, where we were flying drones for gas line methane detection. What they did was they actually knocked on everybody's door saying that we were flying a drone in this area for gas detection, and there was no complaints about that. And I think that was because they approached this in a professional manner. And it was part of a commercial activity with a person of responsibility in there, versus you just going out and flying over. There's no, it becomes an unknown in the sky that invokes a level of fear and anxiety.
I can see it working well on sites like, they used a survey for Sacramento rail yards that were abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Like I live on Alameda Island, and then, the old military buildings, that's, a lot of those are occupied now, but in some area where it's not really occupied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, you might rehab some of the buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would be a good application for
Yeah.
survey.
Now, these are the drone laws as of right now. I can guarantee you they're going to change, and most likely at some point they will allow you to fly over people under either an additional license or additional inspection of your drone, in which case you wouldn't have those problems. So if you don't like the rules that we have now, just wait a year. You'll get new ones.